Okay, so basically for anyone who hasn't seen it yet, I was just going to quickly go over the new SSL mitigation mechanism in the DP20 and the DP60. Under configuration, we've got a new menu item here, SSL settings. If you go there, you can choose to either disable SSL mitigation or enable it using the on-device component or enable it using an external device. If you change any of these settings, then you have to reboot the device. You have the SSL certificate repository where you can import the certificates that you're going to use for the handshake during the challenge mechanism. We support up to 1,024 certificates. And we have a new concept here of protected SSL objects. And basically what this is it allows you to map a IP address and port combination to a certificate and parameters like what version of SSL, if you want to define custom cipher strings, etc. So it's almost kind of like the SSL policy was on the Alteon. Then, of course, to actually configure the protections, you need to be under the network protection policies. And under our SYN protection profiles is where we typically configure SSL mitigation. So we have one defined here already, one profile defined here already. I'll go ahead and add another one just so you see how that works. So you would have to add in which SYN protections you want to have. If we're talking about SSL mitigation, it's typically HTTP and HTTPS. And once you've added these, then you can go to the profile parameters. And you'll see it automatically created a profile parameter set with the same name as whatever profile protection you just created. You have to go in here. You want to enable TCP reset. You also want to enable HTTP authentication and use the SSL mitigation, which is the challenge basically. So once you've done that, then you can go to the network protection policies. And if you look at your policy, you can choose your SYN protection profile. You see the new one that we created is there. And now we have also an associated protected objects. So basically, if you remember on their setup, I created an SSL protected object, which, as I said, really bind the IP address and port combination to a particular certificate and SSL parameters. So if I know that this policy, this network policy that I'm creating here, is across multiple IP addresses, multiple destination IP addresses, and I want each of them to be handled differently in terms of the challenge mechanism, I'd have to create a different SSL protected object for each one. And that is basically it, all that's required to get the SSL mitigation set up. Certainly a lot easier than configuring it on the Alteon. And if we were to just fire up some tests here, just send some SYNs towards this, or actually I'll do full HTTPS connections using HTTP Flutter. Okay, and right off the bat, we'll see that we're getting, well, we got some HTTP 200 response codes. Those were the initial connections. And then we started getting 302s. If you look at the numbers, you'll see that the 200s are not going up. That's because every connection is being challenged now. And you can see the number of 302s is going up. If we go to security monitoring, we'll see that we have a SYN flood started. And you can see the action is type challenge. And this part I actually don't get. I think that these TCP challenge and HTTP challenges should be incrementing, but as you can see, there's nothing there. We do have stuff here in the authentication list, both the TCP and the HTTP authentication lists. And you can also go to traffic monitoring. And this is also an issue that I noticed with this MR box. It's an MR box, and I'm running Vision 3.95 here. Periodically, the outbound traffic just disappears. I'm not sure why that is. I mean, obviously, the traffic is still flowing. It just doesn't show up here in Vision. Anyhow, if you look at the authentication statistics here, you can see that we are doing the HTTP authentication, and you can see the challenge rate. We're doing the TCP authentication as well, but the TCP authentication is passing, which is why it doesn't show as an attack here. So the big flaw that I see for this, oh, and by the way, it does eventually log a message every time the SSL mitigation is initiated. In other words, we start challenging connections, you'll get a log message here. The big flaw that I see with all of this is that there are no statistics here. There's nothing here that tells you, what you're doing in terms of SSL utilization. At least with the external device, you could go look at the Altion and you can look at the number of handshakes and whatnot. There is no statistics here for any of that stuff. So I'm not sure how you're actually supposed to see what the performance levels are beyond looking at the number of challenges that are being issued. Anyhow, that's it.